I came across a forum where there was a swift argument about the perfect percentage of keyword density. And I laughed my way in, I laughed my way out, I got out quietly. There are a couple rules dealing with patents. Rule number one is if the patent doesn't mention a specific term or phrase, it's not about that. There are other ones where people wrote about them months after I did and made stuff up.
And welcome to another edition of SEO Pioneers. Today, I'm delighted to be speaking to Bill Slawski, who I'm sure needs little introduction. Bill has actually been an SEO professional since 1996. Bill is probably best known for his deconstruction of Google patents, where he takes deep dives into very complex documents. Now, Bill actually started out a long time ago working in civil and criminal law courts, and he holds a degree in law. So maybe that's where his passion for legal documents comes from. But just to start off, Bill, I wanted to ask you, how do you go from being a legal administrator to SEO? That's quite a big leap.
I had a friend who needed help. That made the difference. He was a service engineer or a service mechanic at a car dealership, and he hated his job. He despised it. He didn't want to go into work every day. I was reading a book on how to run a business as a registered agent for corporations. And I suggested to him that he do that. And he looked at it and thought about it and said, Bill, this is a good idea, except I don't know how to build a web page. So I said, don't worry about that. I went to the bookstore. I found a book, Learn HTML in 2 weeks. I spent 2 weeks, built a website. He helped me with it. We started his business. I had another friend who was a lawyer who was renting a house in the area that had an empty room and suggested that they combine efforts. And the guy with the no job and the guy with the empty room get together. And the tough part about being a registered agent in Delaware is the technical requirements are that you are open to receive mail. That's it. There are no technical requirements beyond that. So you get the mail every day. You make sure nobody's getting sued. If they are, you let them know. So the website worked out. It looked like an ugly Christmas tree on the first rendition. Get better at it. I got rid of the spinning globes and the shades. Yeah. And then the tough part was once I had a website, learning how to promote it. And learn a lot of lessons from there. So one of the best was my friend put a currency converter on the website, and it had code that wasn't HTML. It was more like UBB, Universal Bulletin Board code, and it was hard to build and so on. So we put a page up, used that UBB, and other people running e-commerce websites linked to it because they wanted a way to do easy currency conversion, but they didn't want to build it on their own site. So this was back in the days when there was a PageRank toolbar. And we noticed that enough other people linked to that it was outranking other pages on the website. So I took a look at the page, I rewrote it so that it had less branding to it. So people wouldn't mind as much linking to it. And we got more people linked to it. So that added value to how the rest of the site ranked because it had stronger internal page rank.
So you basically stumbled across one of the very first digital PR link baits.
It was effective.
Yeah.
I mean, we had people selling sheepskin sneakers from New Zealand. We had people selling Bowie knives, and they were using our currency converter to help them do their sales.
Just out of interest, actually, back in those days, how did you track who was linking to you?
We had programs like AW Stats, which were great for telling your client, "Oh, you have more traffic."
Mm-hmm.
They weren't too heavily in depth in the analytics, but they were enough to tell you things like you're getting traffic from certain places.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best places I found to get links from was a Polish classified website. And I submitted to it to get links, and we got 2 customers from Eastern Europe who were relatively, they were sending ships to South America from Europe on a regular basis, like 5 or 6 ships a week. And they were incorporating a new ship every time they had a new cargo. We had 2 different customers doing that, and that helped build the stability of the company.
So what year was this?
This was 96, 97.
So basically did you have any coding background, coding experience before you came to this?
No, and the HTML experience I had was from that book.
Just literally learn from the book, yeah, and then develop from there. How long were you doing that before you actually decided to stop working in the law courts?
A couple months. My friend, his sister worked selling computers at Digital Equipment Corp. And one of the places, if you were around back then, you may have recognized that domain because there was a search engine by the name of altavista.digital.com.
Mm-hmm.
So Altavista was owned by Digital Equipment Corp.
Mm-hmm.
And she sent an email saying, "Hey, you guys might like this." And I took a look at it, and it was submit one URL at a time search engine. And a lot of people were using it. It was like the #1 search engine in the land in the US for Google.
Mm-hmm.
So that was sort of my first experience with SEO.
But at that time, there was probably very, very few other SEOs around, I would imagine, in 96. So at what point did you actually start to come into contact with other people?
I'm very curious. I want to learn how things work. I want to have some idea of what's going on. So I looked for other SEOs, and I found some. I came across a forum where there was a swift argument about the perfect percentage of keyword density. I laughed my way in, I laughed my way out, I got out quietly. I didn't want to get involved.
I've got to ask, Bill, did anybody mention LSI keywords?
No, that's like a 2000 invention. LSI was patented in 1988, but LSI keywords are complete fiction.
Yeah, I know.
And there are at least two tool makers and a bunch of SEOs who promote it.
Yeah.
The SEOs who promote it, some of them got paid millions from tool makers, and it's nonsense. They're saying use things like Watson Natural Language API to get your LSI keywords. It's like, what planet are you from? No, that's like a 2000 invention. LSI was patented in 1988, but LSI keywords are complete fiction.
Yeah, I know.
And there are at least two tool makers and a bunch of SEOs who promote it.
Yeah.
The SEOs who promote it, some of them got paid millions from tool makers, and it's nonsense. They're saying use things like Watson Natural Language API to get your LSI keywords. It's like, what planet are you from?
What channels, because obviously there's no social media in those days.
Yeah.
So what channels, how were you, what were you doing online?
I had a friend, Kim Kraus, who started up a web promotion forum, and she studied usability and qualitative analysis and SEO and offered all three. But she was working with people who were just starting businesses and teaching them how to do things like set up different corporations, different corporate structures, which I knew about because I'd been working for this incorporation business, which we set up to do SEO. And people would ask questions, I would answer them. She would answer them. I was her moderator. And we stuck together. We ended up expanding to a larger forum with its own domain name. It was Create a Site Forums. And we added other people. We sort of had a who's who of SEOs. We had people like Jill Whalen, Eamon Johns. John Mueller was one of our moderators, as was Pierre Farr.
Oh, that's interesting. What year was John Moo in the forum?
The early 2000s.
He was there that early, right?
And I remember when he got contacted by Google and he wasn't sure. He was running a software company that was making XML sitemaps in the early 2000s.
Soft Plus.
And he had to make the choice between continuing to do that or joining Google. And we talked and I suggested he join Google, that it was a good opportunity. You wouldn't have to move anywhere. He could keep on doing something close to what he was doing anyway. So at the time, he'd sort of moved over to answering questions on the Google Webmaster Help Forum. And he was answering lots of people, lots of questions.
What year did you actually start Create a Site?
That was the early 2000s, maybe 2001, 2002. Kim and I started we're working on a Yahoo group, a Yahoo club. You had people who would show up and do tag team spamming. One person would show up and ask a question, and then 5 minutes later, somebody else would show up and come up with the perfect answer. And then if you Googled the question and answer, you'd see they had done it lots of times before. It was like a traveling show. A number of people who joined the forum and would name themselves SEO expert turned me off to the idea of SEOs calling themselves experts. People would join SEO expert. First question would be, how does PageRank work? So one of the things I loved about that forum was we had something called a website hospital. People submit their sites to and say, okay, what can I do to make it a little bit better? So we had the guy who owned Plenty of Fish show up with this dolphin-heavy website. And everybody said right away, too many dolphins. One guy working out of his home, and he started making all kinds of money from it. He started doing SEO and people came.
And he started out with a lot of dolphins.
He started out with a lot of dolphins.
Like pre-2000, like really early on, say when you were, you were just starting out and you said you were connecting with other people.
I slowly met people. Like I met Danny. I joined Search Engine Watch when he was writing for that. And then when he left Search Engine Watch and went to Search Engine Land, I went with him and Barry. I had a chance to write for some of those things. I think it scared Danny a little bit about having somebody writing about patents without long disclaimers. So he made sure I put long disclaimers and everything.
What actually attracted you to the patents? I mean, was it anything to do with having that legal background, or was it just purely, as you said, you're a person who really likes to understand and deconstruct things? Was it just your desire to try and break it down?
So my focus was on helping my friend become a registered agent.
Yeah.
In a specific state. The focus of the website was performing that action in that state, or finding people who wanted to register in that state. So I said, okay, people are interested in this patent about historical information. are there patents about Delaware specifically? And I read through them, and there were patents specifically about places being the focus of websites. So I read through those, and they offer really good suggestions on how to optimize a website for a specific state. So I did. Instructions on how to do things. Most patents aren't roadmaps on this is how you do this specifically. Some of them are. Like in 2003, 2004, Google came out with one on definitions. And you could write definitions, you could write glossary pages, and Google would pull your definitions from those glossary pages and put them at the top of organic search results, giving them a position 0, which we know from featured snippets is a good place to be. But it was years before there were featured snippets. So I took little lessons like that. And I have one friend in France who used definitions from poker games to build websites and make lots of money. So he's happy that I came up with that. I didn't start SEO by the Sea until 2005.
Okay.
So I wrote about that in about 2006 or so. Of course, I read some of the really early ones, like the patent for PageRank or so. That was good to know.
Yeah.
And then I started looking for things that were related, like the reasonable surfer model,
Yeah.
which played off of that. Or there was another one, the reasonable surfer model, another one from other ones from Jeff Dean, who wrote a lot of the crawling patents. And a lot of the crawling patents talked about things like anchor maps and how they kept lists of anchor text and how they treated redirects, stuff like that. So it was a alternative way to get information that SEOs were sharing already, but it was a different perspective, a different view. And it was good seeing those.
Do you think so? When you were reading that, do you think you were finding new insights that other SEOs weren't aware of? Or was it just underlining things that were already in the community?
I wrote about 3 patents this last weekend. One of them was on topical authority, and it was a fresh take on topical authority because it talked about how social networks and user-generated content would go into building topical authority. And that was fascinating to see. There are a couple rules dealing with patents. Rule number 1 is if the patent doesn't mention a specific term or phrase, it's not about that. So if you've got a patent that's about site quality and it talks about ratios of referring domains to domains that have implied links, it's about quality. It's not about brands. It doesn't use the word brand once. It has nothing to do with brand mentions. There are other ones where people wrote about them months after I did and made stuff up. And they get it wrong.
So what is it you think they're getting wrong?
They're writing clickbait. Or do you know Anna Lynn Patterson? She wrote one called Recall. She filed a patent for phrase-based indexing. And it's what I'd refer to as a semantic topic model. It says that when you optimize a page for something like President of the United States, you're going to have complete and meaningful phrases on your page that co-occur on other pages that rank highly for that, that are related to it, that predict what the page is about. So you'll have terms like Secretary of State, Oval Office, Rose Garden interview. And these are phrases that predict that the page is about President of the United States. So you're in effect, if you use these phrases on your page, you're building a semantic topic model. It has nothing to do with LSI,
Mm.
even though somebody wrote clickbait that says it does. LSI was invented by Bell Labs. It was a singular value. It was a mathematical way of understanding how words were connected on a page. John Firth, who is a computer linguist, is well known for the phrase, "You shall know a word by the company it keeps."
Mm-hmm.
And the premise behind LSI.
Yeah.
Words to be connected together in documents are words that show they're semantically related in a meaningful way. The patent shows a example database of 8 books. The web is much too large to use LSI on. It changes too much.
Mm-hmm.
LSI, every time you add new data, you need to reindex the
Mm-hmm.
whole. So imagine a website with comments and pages people add and delete and update, and the web just keeps on growing every day.
Mm-hmm.
It's much too busy for LSI. And then this LSI keyword stuff is something toolmakers just invented.
Mm.
They were playing off the name of the technology. They made it up to sell.
So if we just come back to like patents, what would you say is, do you have a favorite patent? Do you have a favorite Google patent?
It's hard to tell. I like the reasonable surfer model patents. There was a original and then there was an update. The update said, take a look at a window of words around the anchor text, and those may be used instead. I like the phrase-based indexing. There are actually 20 or so patents that came after the original first phrase-based indexing. One of them is a inverted index of complete and meaningful phrases. So if you want to know whether or not, if Google wants to know whether or not a page is optimized for phrases, it can just look them up. It already knows what the phrases are on all the pages. It's indexed them. It's got a posting list. Sort of like the inverted index list of words on pages when you do a query and you want to match the keywords on your query to keywords on documents. Google knows where those words are on documents already. So it can just look them up. And then it does it makes a decision as to which of them rank higher based on things like links.
Which patent do you think has been the most kind of influential on how search is developed?
It's hard to tell. I would suggest to people, if they're interested in reading patents, they also start reading things like information retrieval books and information architecture books, because there's a lot to be learned from those things. A good information retrieval book, like the one that the new head of search, or the most recent head of search at Google, combined with some other SEO search engineers to write, starts out with a chapter on inverted indexes, which is really worth reading. It's not patented, but it's a very useful part of how search works.
So when Google came on the scene, did you see it as that they would become as dominant as they did? Or was it a surprise? I mean, because I know a lot of people, there were so many search engines in the early days, right at the beginning. I mean, did anybody actually anticipate that the web would become dominated by just one? It's really become a monopoly, hasn't it, really?
You join an agency and end up running reports for 11 different search engines.
So just coming back to Creator Site, how do you see the difference now between social media and what forums were like in the early days?
Creator Site was a great learning opportunity. It was a great chance to learn specific things from certain people. Like Eamon would write about marketing.
Mhm.
He was one of the people who would detail how marketing works and how creativity and campaigns could benefit people.
Mhm.
And that took most people by surprise. And it was fun pulling in information from other sources, like
Mhm.
experienced people like Jared Spool or Jacob Nielsen, who often didn't agree on things. Jared Spool also he was from user interface engineering, and they both wrote about usability,
Yeah.
but they write stuff about whether or not searchers would scroll down web pages,
Uh-huh.
and when they would stop. And Nielsen said at first they don't scroll. And Spool said they keep on scrolling until it looks like the page is ended. And then there's a horizontal bar that goes across the bottom of the page, and they stop scrolling, even though they could keep on scrolling. And it was good seeing their arguments, because sometimes one was right and one was wrong. But they backed up what they said with arguments. So it was fun introducing those types of things at the forum and seeing what other people thought.
What other like topics were people discussing apart from these kind of things? What were the topics at the time that really seemed to have people?
Well, people are always interested in things like how to set up businesses that would thrive. I mean, we had a number of people who were setting up affiliate programs,
Mhm.
because they thought if they had an affiliate program, they wouldn't have to rely on clients all the time.
Mhm.
And then we had people who wanted to rely on clients, but were afraid to.
Did you ever fancy doing affiliate work? I mean, obviously, I know SEOs early on, they could have made a lot of money. And I know obviously some did make a lot of money.
I think just like most SEOs, I tried some affiliate work. I think most people in the SEO industry were Amazon booksellers. And I sold some books, not too many. So I sort of backed away from that. I found it more fun to actually work with clients, give them business promotion and marketing advice, help them get links, help them grow their business, make their site stronger. I found little things that were helpful, like in 2000, the early 2000s, BJ Fogg came out with a page on web credibility, where he discussed things that made a website more credible, sort of like the EAT score. There is no EAT score.
even in back in the early 2000s.
2000s, he went to Stanford University, where two guys named Brennan Page also went. I don't know who rubbed off who, but somebody may have. He was a teaching assistant at the time. He came up with that. He had a project that had 4,500 participants on web credibility. And he came up with a single page that had 10 things you could add to your website that made it more credible. Like showing that there's a real organization behind your site, showing the links worked and that they went to helpful places. It's something I had been giving to clients for years because it is helpful. It does show you're really business. Your business has won awards, it's known in the community, stuff like that. It exists. And people can see that and say, yeah, this is a real site. These are people I work with.
How do you think it compares now to back then? Do you think it was more positive then or now?
It's like Heinz 51 flavors. There are different flavors now. There's some technical businesses that are really successful for one reason or another. We've seen cycles. We've seen places like Plenty of Fish grow and get purchased by companies like Match. We have some great sources of news. I love Bloomberg News. I wrote a story in 2011 on IBM selling a bunch of patents to Google. I had a reporter from Bloomberg News call me and say, "How did you scoop us? You've got New York Times, Wall Street Journal, many others quoting you about this sale. How did you know?" I visit the United States Patent and Trademark Office on a regular basis, and they have an assignment database. The assignment database said IBM sold a bunch of patents to Google. So I went through them all, found all the ones related to search, wrote a blog post, said, here are the 15 or so of the patents I liked in that purchase. The next day, I had quotes from New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and so on. I ended up getting a couple 100,000 quote links over a period of about a month. The question of being in the right place at the right time, saying the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, Google was hurting for patents. They were seen as a glass house, possibly being blown over at any point in time. They had very little protection from an intellectual property stance. So acquiring 1,000 patents from IBM, who was the biggest producer of patents in the US, and I believe still is. They ended up purchasing about 2,000 or so in 2011 from IBM.
From IBM. So how instrumental were IBM in search? You know, what kind of development were they doing in the early days?
Very little. They had scammy websites. They had websites where they would give content to affiliates, and it was often duplicated content from one site to another. I didn't like working on IBM pages. There was too much stuff that was too similar to too many other things they had on the web.
So looking back on it, what would you say, if you look back to those early days, what do you really miss about the industry, say in the late 90s? What was it that you was really great for you?
A little bit later in the early 2000s, working with the creative site people was a blast. We had a tremendous crew of people who unfortunately at the time I didn't get to meet in person. It wasn't until a couple of years ago I got a chance to go to London, and I met up with a lot of them. But we used different avatar names. We used different pictures. We didn't know who each other were. We met each other. We learned about each other. We spent time answering questions together. It was sort of like water cooler moments every day. We had a chance to actually talk to people. It was fun. We didn't meet in person until years later. We ended up going to conferences and changing our names back to what our names were so that people could pronounce them and recognize us. So I went with my company, an agency I was working with at the time, to New York City search engine strategies. And the people I was there with were saying, "How are you so brave? How come you know everybody?" I said, "I don't know them. They know my avatar. I'm just telling them what my real name is."
Are you involved in any forums now? I mean, have you actually dabbled on Reddit?
I haven't done too much with Reddit. I like reading Reddit. Reddit's a great way to find out local news.
I find Reddit quite interesting. I dip in and out of it. I've actually just got my account back because it got suspended bizarrely, and I'm fortunate that I managed to get it back. I've had a Reddit account for like 12 years. But Yeah, I find like Reddit really interesting. And I keep coming back to it because I see it as quite an interesting source, and also like what Reddit is now, like the community. I imagine it being a lot like, what the forums were like 20 years ago,
It helps you create connections that you otherwise wouldn't. I have a coworker who read on Reddit about a guy who owned a hydraulic press channel on YouTube with 500,000 subscribers. At the time, we had a client who was a jeweler, and we convinced the jeweler to donate a 1-carat diamond to the guy with the hydraulic press, who then took the 1-carat diamond and applied his hydraulic press to the diamond to crush it. He filmed it. He did a page where he linked to the jeweler and showed us crushing a 1-carat diamond. Had over 10 million views on the video to help build the brand. It was great. Get a lot of advertising for free.
That's just like a will it blend, isn't it?
Also one diamond. Yeah.
Wow. Did it crush it?
Yeah. Diamonds do crush using hydraulic presses. And then he followed up by showing that crushed diamonds burn using acetylene torches.
It just reminds me very much of the Will It Blend series, where essentially just throwing, random objects into a blender, which I thought was a great series.
Go Fish does do some digital PR type stuff, like crushing diamonds.
I do like a nice creative, obscure way to promote something, and especially using offline in combination with it online.
One of my favorites was working with a limousine company. We worked with them to create a map of Washington, D.C. area where people had been engaged. And you could visit this interactive map, click on a place, see what it's like, see where people ask someone else to marry them. It got lots of visits. It got lots of links from high-ranking wedding magazines and so on. We had other ones like that. We had one, what is the most popular used car in your area where you live? We found out that the Ford F-150 was the most popular vehicle in California. We had a Los Angeles radio station bragging about it.
How did you find that out?
We were working with the company that had an application, and their app would let you put what type of car you're looking for and would tell you if the used car dealership you were driving past carried that car and how much it charged for it. So they're collecting that data as proprietary data anyway. So being able to use that made it easier to come up with that information. A lot of companies do have proprietary data that you're not actually sharing with anybody, but people want to know. You remind me of one of my favorite campaigns.
Yeah.
The 2005 entity optimization campaign. I was working with a well-known city on the East Coast of the United States. They had a visitors convention center, and they're trying to get people to travel to the city. I was optimizing the city for terms like city name sports, city name museums, city name other things that were related, and we were matching words in the query to words in the document. So repeat the words in the document 5 times or so and try to rank for it. So they wanted to rank a page for Black history. So we created a page that had Black history, Baltimore, city name, Black history on it like 5 times. It ended up ranking about 115. So my copywriter was working remotely at some farmhouse. I sent her a message saying, okay, there are lots of famous colleges, lots of famous schools, lots of famous churches, lots of famous people who lived in this town. Can you write something about visiting these places that people are known for? There's a 9-foot tall statue of Billie Holiday. There are 6 townhomes from Frederick Douglass when he was in his 60s. He left Baltimore a slave as a teenager and came back a wealthy shipping magnate. And he purchased these 6 townhomes. Can you write something up about the city that tells people about these famous people who lived there once upon a time? She wrote a walking tour of the city. Within 6 weeks or so of writing that, it was the 6th most visited page on the website of over 300 pages. There's so many people were coming into town to do this walking tour. I visited the website within the last year, and the whole website's geared towards that type of entity optimization approach now. They sort of moved away from the matching words in a query to matching words on web pages.
Just to wrap up, I think a little question that I quite like to ask is there something that you can share with me that you've never shared before? It can be something that you've done to like get something to rank, or a story from like the old days. Anything you can share?
So I started digging into some of the private, I'll call them private databases at the USPTO, where stuff like the first provisional PageRank patent showed up from Lawrence Page. And shortly after he published that, Sergey Brin wrote a patent about books and about finding books on the web. And he said, okay, these 5 books, if a crawler comes across them and finds information about them, it should crawl all the books on all those pages and make a big list, and then move on to the next site it can find those 5 books on. It's like Google becoming Amazon, sort of. But Google learning about key value pairs for entities. And it was sort of Google's introduction to the semantic web, where they were more concerned about finding out information about real world objects and how they could end up building things like knowledge graphs or knowledge bases, where they collect information about that type of stuff. So that was right after PageRank. That was the second patent. And we don't think of Google as that big a source of semantic information, but we should be. I mean, it wasn't until 2009 where we had blog posts at Google from Nathan Guha talking about rich results, but we did. And we've had other things. Most people probably aren't aware of Andrew Hogue when he worked at Google on something called the annotation framework. But the annotation framework was an early version of the knowledge graph. And he built something called the browsable fact repository, which is exactly like the knowledge graph. It's a collection of entities and information about those key value pairs taken from colon delimited lists on places like Wikipedia. We're collecting facts about different objects. And those facts, you might build schema these days. This was before schema existed, but it was a way of collecting that information and being able to display it in knowledge panels. He had a bunch of people, 13 other search engineers who were writing patents about different semantic ways of indexing things, like local search. Local search avoids things like PageRank to build on citations. It is more of a entity-based approach, more of a semantic-based approach. It was like a proof of concept, and this is how the semantic web works. Microsoft did a similar thing with object level ranking. In 2007, they had an academic search and they had a product level search that were both more semantic. And it's good seeing both search engines got involved in the semantic approach to the web. It's something we don't think too much about. We're seeing Google do things now with answering queries, building knowledge graphs based on them, and then providing answers to those queries based on the knowledge graph they built. Like you do a search for best science fiction 2020, and Google will give you a carousel of ranked books with the best science fiction novels listed in that carousel. And they do that by taking the search results and building a knowledge graph off of them, finding all the entities, ranking them, and showing them in order. So it's good seeing the semantic approach connected.
Okay, sorry, I'm just listening in absolute rapt. It's just I could listen. I'm only being quiet, Bill, because I'm just processing and listening to what you're saying, because it is I absolutely love semantic search and where things are going with the knowledge graph as well. I find it one of the most fascinating areas, and connecting entities, etc. Tracking where this is developing. So yeah, it is a really, really interesting subject, and I love also tracing it right back to the early days. And part of why I want to do this series really is to look forwards. You got to look backwards. So looking at the early days, seeing how things were seeded and started and then have developed over time is so interesting.
We haven't really talked about things like natural language processing or word vectors or berg or so on. We haven't talked about something I've seen a lot in patents lately with automated assistants and conversational search into computer dialogue. The fact that we've got ways from Google of having conversations between Google and people. And the problem is people aren't very good at it. People will talk to the computer, and the computer will continuously ask itself, are we on the same subject? Same subject? He wants to know what the weather is now. Weather is now. And then see if we get back to the same subject. There's some patents that talk about soliciting information from the search engine by a human. And the computer has to listen to cues as to whether or not the human is still interested in the same topic. Because humans aren't very good at search. And it's fun actually running across one of those patents where they talk about how an automated assistant at Google now might make up for kids running queries. I want to know how Pluto works, if it's a real planet, if it's a dwarf planet. How can you be a dwarf planet? Sort of makes reading the patent fun when the people writing the patent are trying to cover everything. I'm writing about one today. I wrote about 3 different ones this weekend and got rid of one because it was probably too hard for my audience. It happens.
Yeah, I think for most of us mere mortals out here, Bill, most of us, it's like, we're way up here, we're down here, it's up here.
They started going to machine learning models. And that one was probably a little bit too much for most people. One guy I like a lot is Lex Friedman, who went to school at MIT, and he does a lot of AI stuff. He interviews people from DeepMind and Google and a few other places. Brings up some really, and things like the origin of consciousness and so on. does a lot of stuff where he asks tough questions and gets people to answer them.
Yeah, we're going really deep now. The origin of consciousness. You know what? I think I'm actually going to leave it there before we go down a huge rabbit hole, because I think that was probably another conversation that would be very interesting for sure. Yeah. So, Bill, I would just like to say thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me, and it's just been really interesting listening to your story and some of the history of over the last, 25 years. So thank you.
It's hard to tell where we're going, but we are going.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, that's one thing you can rely on, right? Everything is going to keep evolving, whether we like it or not. Nothing is ever going to stand still, and everything keeps moving. So yeah, you're either with it or you get left behind, right? And I'd much rather be right at the edge, keeping going with it, than getting left behind. So
it's fun being in the position I'm in now. I'm in more of a teaching position.
Yeah.
Here are things to explore and think about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even with some of the companies we work with, I'll do some. These might be patents that might be relevant to your company. Things to think about when we create.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, amazing. That's actually a really interesting point. What we need is, we need a catalogue of all the different patents and what they all refer to.
You get to bring up some of the old tricks from SEO from 25 years ago. Like, here's how to build links by writing letters. I can hire people to write letters to people to get links from my site. So yeah, you can do that.
Yeah,
Here's an example of somebody I did that with.
I did some some business generation work about maybe 5 years ago, and I actually sat down and did some handwritten fountain pen letters and typewritten, old typewriter written, and mailed them out, and things. But yeah, it's it's easy to get people's attention, really, isn't it? But yeah, doing things like that for sure. Anyway, Bill, I shall wrap up there, and I shall say thank you very much for the conversation, and thank you for your time. And I hope you enjoy your day, and I hope to speak to you soon.